I'm Rick Harp. This is your APTN News Brief for Tuesday, February 6th. We begin with a disturbing story out of Winnipeg. A mother and father charged with manslaughter in the fentanyl-related death of their 1-year-old. Tamara Pimentel reports.
In March 2023, the Winnipeg Police Services Child Abuse Unit opened an investigation into the sudden death of 1-year-old Hannah Boulette. Toxicology and autopsy reports determined her death was caused by high levels of fentanyl intoxication. Gary Bruce and Sabrina Boulette were both charged with manslaughter and taken into custody. When the incident happened in March, police say the child's father called 911 after his daughter became unresponsive at their home. Paramedics gave the child CPR and she was taken to hospital where she was pronounced dead. At the time, both parents were arrested for criminal negligence causing death, and Bruce was also charged with possession of a controlled substance, and they were both released. Investigators later determined that the parents gave little detail of the incident and had been present and aware of Hannah's fentanyl exposure. Police say they waited several hours before calling 911.
The amount of time that had passed from where the parents were aware of the child's fentanyl exposure to the time that 911 was called was certainly a factor that may have played in the child's death.
WPS Constable Claude Chansey says this brings last year's homicide count for Winnipeg to 44.
We're seeing more of these incidents come through, and this is not just particular to Winnipeg. There's more occurrences you'll have noticed in other parts of Canada, and for us, it's a very concerning thing.
Chansey says both parents have had contact with police in the past and were using drugs when Hannah was exposed to fentanyl. The charges against the parents have not been tested in court. Tamara Pimentel, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
To Alberta, where recently announced restrictions on medical access for some transgender youth have been criticized. Premier Daniel Smith took to social media to declare age limits on gender-affirming surgeries and some related drug therapies. Limits the NDP brought up in question period Monday when Edmonton MP Blake Desjardins asked whether the Liberal government will intervene using the Canada Health Act, a question fielded by Edmonton Liberal MP Randy Boissonneau.
Danielle Smith is denying trans kids their basic human rights by denying their access to life-saving healthcare. It's not the role of politicians to tell doctors how to treat patients. Meanwhile, this leader of the Conservative Party remains shamefully silent on attacks on trans rights. The hate and prejudice of some should never override the fundamental rights of others. Will this government commit to using the powers of the Canada Health Act to intervene in any denial of life-saving care for trans youth?
Warm, fuzzy video hiding daggers at my community in Alberta came out last week on social media. I have spent hours on the phone consoling people who are crying on the phone asking how we can stand up for the rights of two LGBTQ people in Alberta. Mr. Speaker, we are going to continue to work on this, and I have one message for Albertans and people across the country. Legal challenges notwithstanding, the one way we can stop this is to kill the bill before it gets to the legislature. So write to your UCP members, get fired up, mobilize, because kids' rights matter.
A fatal house fire has claimed the lives of 2 people in the Cree community of Piawanuk in northern Ontario. And Anishinaabe Police Services confirmed 2 adults as deceased due to fire, while 3 others remain in hospital for further treatment. Just under 800 kilometers north of Thunder Bay, Piawanuk's no stranger to fatal fires, including one a year ago that took the life of a 10-year-old girl. Anishinaabe Nation says federal funding was approved in 2022 for a new fire truck, but it's yet to be operational. The investigation into the fire is ongoing. To Manitoba.
Kids shouldn't have to go to school hungry, but for some of my peers across Manitoba, this is the case.
The voice of a student at a recent provincial government media event announcing its expansion of school nutrition programming. Premier Wab Kinew announced $30 million to establish a universally accessible school nutrition program by the 2024-25 school year.
When we go to Ashern, we're talking about a principal that shows up at 6 a.m. to bake muffins of her own volition, of her own motivation. When we go to Dauphin, we see a friendship center that's preparing with volunteers 800 meals to meet the needs of the students at the schools in town. And what we're saying is, when we're talking about young people, we're talking about kids, we're talking about education, it's important that the government step up and match that commitment.
And of that $30 million, 15 will go directly towards school divisions for local meal programs, $6 million to public schools in communities with the highest socioeconomic need, and $9 million in grants for application-based nutrition programming. And the Child Nutrition Council of Manitoba will immediately receive more than $1 million in additional grant funding for the current school year. Conservative MP Gary Vidal has resigned as the party's critic for Indigenous services. First elected in the northern Saskatchewan riding of Desnethe-Mississippi-Churchill River in 2019, Vidal began his role as Indigenous services critic in 2021. No word yet on who the Conservatives will appoint as a successor. And finally, Vancouver City Council has greenlit a major urban housing development led by First Nations. Tina House has more.
We have some carvings right here as like little street posts, and obviously the totem poles. When people walk through the streets of Yelmo, they'll inherently know in the back of their minds, oh, this is the land of Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh.
In 2016, the 3 First Nations surrounding the city of Vancouver bought 90 acres of land and a $480 million deal with the federal government. It's in a prime location across the street from Jericho Beach and was once the village site of Yelmouth, where many nations would gather. It sat empty until now. The city of Vancouver has approved the 3 nations to develop on their land that is going to change the beleaguered rental housing market in Vancouver, including 13,000 rentals subsidized in private condos that will welcome 24,000 residents. Spaces for commercial, light industrial, and retail businesses are expected to create over 3,000 new jobs. Childcare spaces, parks, and culturally significant social spaces, including artist studios for carving, weaving, and other activities, is going to be established. A non-traditional library and ceremonial gathering place is also part of the plan.
And it's going to be safe, affordable homes. It's going to be market homes.
Chief Jen Thomas of the Tsleil-Waututh Nation says she is proud of all the work to make this project happen.
Housing's a big issue for everybody, not just us on reserves. You know, we don't have space on the reserves, so this gives us an opportunity for our members even just to move back to Vancouver.
William George Thomas is a cultural liaison for all 3 nations, and he was a part of the planning process.
All of the artists from all Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh are going to be all over the project, and it's really going to try and illustrate the story of Yelmo, which is where Jericho is, how Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh have historically always been here.
It's very exciting. You know, this is a dream come true. And late Leonard George, you know, this is one of his biggest dreams, the 3 nations to come together and be developers like this in our own shared territory. I know he's smiling down on us right now.
The project will take place in phases over the next 25 to 30 years. Tina House, APTN National News, North Vancouver.
And that's your APTN News Brief for Tuesday, February 6th. I'm Rick Harp.